Welcome to this special edition of 2 Half Hours. I'm your host, Manuel Rapalo, and it's been 2 months since the Occupy Wall Street movement started, and it's still getting support. What we want to do here tonight is to hear your voices. We have a panel we have an audience of people who are holding an open dialogue about the Occupy Together movement and also about the future of capitalism here in America and around the world. So to start tonight's debate per se, I want to welcome all of you here, and I also want to get a sense of how you feel about the Occupy Together movement, what it means to you and what it represents to you. And you have the mic if you want to go ahead and start.
Hello, my name is Cecilia, and what the Occupy movement means to me is a hope in a time where the transatlantic system is collapsing completely and governments have been taken over by supranational financial interests. So I see this organization as having the potential to organize a new system in the shell of this collapsing system that we're currently living under, and to have a dialogue about an economic system that actually works for the 99%. So I do take my inspiration from the protests and the revolutions in the Middle East, as well as the revolutions in South America that have happened that were effectively kicked out the financial interests from Bolivia, from Venezuela. And I hope that, now the revolution has kind of immigrated to the United States, and we'll see what happens from here.
Thank you. I also want to introduce a special guest that we have on our show today, Ted Rall, who is a political cartoonist joining us from New York. How you doing there, Ted?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and hi to everyone in the studio.
Hello.
Hi.
So we can continue a little bit and get a better sense of how everyone here feels. Do you you also have the mic there if we get you to state your name and maybe let us know if you feel the same way, that the Arab Spring was definitely something that inspired the movements here in the United States?
Well, it definitely was the catalyst for a worldwide general raise in awareness of the financial system. And when it comes to the 1%, it's really more of 0.001% who really control the economic, monetary policies of the world. And so it being a global movement now, especially based off the Occupy movement itself, getting money out of politics and really putting an eye on the banking systems, it's great that that's really coming together worldwide, and we can really actually do something about this because it is a global banking scheme, for lack of a better word, but it's the perfect word, so it's beautiful.
Great. Thanks for the opening statements there, guys. But Ted, good to see you again. I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of what it's like on the ground in New York these days. We've been following the Wall Street protests and the arrests that have gone on. What's the sense that you're getting about the movement 2 months into the demonstrations?
Well, I think that the authorities have probably done the movement an amazing favor by exposing themselves as the violent brutes that we always knew that they were. I think when the revolution comes, we should put up a statue to Mayor Bloomberg, because he has really helped draw attention to the movement and energize us in a way that is, just incredible. I mean, there are over 2,000 of these occupations globally. And the movement is spreading everywhere. I live on the eastern end of Long Island, and I just came back a couple days ago. I was at a General Assembly for Occupy the Hamptons. It can happen anywhere, and it is happening anywhere. And this is definitely the prequel to to next year. As soon as the weather is warm, it's going to be on, and I think there's a sense of incredible optimism. One of the most amusing things to me was the typical pundit question: does the raid on Zuccotti Park mean the end of the movement? Of course not. Quite to the contrary. It's all good, and the idea is growing. The movement is growing. According to polls, over 35% of Americans now support the goals of Occupy Wall Street. Hey, you can do a revolution with less than 35% of the population.
Yeah, I think Ted brings up a good point there with that statistic that he points out. It's actually the latest polls that I've seen are somewhere between 35 and 45% of the population actually supports the objectives of this movement. But there's still a lot of criticism from folks on the other side of that who criticize the tactics of the movement, or maybe say that their objectives aren't clear enough. What are your thoughts on that? When you hear folks saying, well, I would maybe support the movement, but I just don't know what the movement's about.
The movement is going to be about what we decide that the movement is going to be about. That is the process right now, is about building and gathering people with common grievances. And what comes next in terms of demands and tactics and strategies is later. It's just premature. Bear in mind, this thing started in September. The Tea Party has never issued a formal request for demands, and it's been several years, and somehow the mass media is okay with that. Right now we're starting to get to know each other. When I was at Stop the Machine, which was a sister occupation to Occupy DC, that's been there since October. One of the things that struck me was how people just were it was such a reaction to the internet. It was a way for people to get together and know each other for the first time. And yeah, there's things that we can do better. There are things that we're going to make mistakes. We have made mistakes, and we're going to make more mistakes. But that doesn't matter. The point is that the idea is powerful, and there's a lot of energy here. And frankly, our enemy is really committing suicide. The United States corporatist system is on the way out. So what we're really discussing is what comes next.
I hear you. And is that the same sense that you in the audience get? And I do want to hear from our audience. Do you guys get that same sense when people approach you and say that maybe they would support the movement, but they're not exactly sure what it's about? What do you tell someone when they're criticizing maybe the tactics that the protesters are using?
Well, actually, one of the biggest problems that we've had when it comes to tactics is not necessarily that they don't know what we're about, as much as there's just, due to the nature of the protest, they automatically assume that we're all, lazy and that we don't have jobs and that we're somehow, just the dredges of society taking advantage of a movement, which is so far from the truth because, I meet people every day who have full-time jobs and are still out there every single day. And, when it comes to people not knowing what we want, as the guest said, the Tea Party has the exact same thing. You go to a Tea Party movement and there are 1,000 different people with 1,000 different views. It just so happens that they, had more access to mass media, and the media was far more likely to accept their ideas than ours. And, time and time again, we get painted in this negative light by so much of the mass media just writes us off as crazies and wackos. But, if I had to say it, it's just, we're fed up with the way the corporate system works nowadays. No one cares about us. They care about how much money they can make, and they will do whatever it takes to do that, even if it means, stomping on the little guy, so.
Right. What about when somebody says that they just don't know what the demands are and that the demands aren't clear, and someone that might be comparing it to the Tea Party would say, well, we know what the Tea Party wants and they're trying to push their agenda through Congress. Why aren't the occupiers doing the same thing? What do you say to someone when they tell you that, what are your demands?
I think when they come down here, when they come down to the occupations and they actually talk to people, they get a much more clear sense of what our demands actually are. Public opinion in this country is bought and paid for by these same people who we are against, these 1%. They have a publicity budget. They pay for this, they pay for that. So they can influence public opinion based on how much money they have. And so when you hear, oh, they don't have any demands, that is just another thing that's being pushed through the airwaves, And so people actually start to repeat, wow, well, I guess they don't have any demands. And it's the same thing for all the things that you hear in the media regarding the Occupy movement. It takes the person to actually go down there and experience it for themselves, because what we have is preconceived conceptions of what this movement is without any actually hard-hitting, firsthand encounters with what the movement's really about. And that is a huge battle that we're fighting. I think the propaganda war is definitely big, and we're combating that right now as we speak. Our demands are clear. They're very clear. You just come down there and they're clear. Let me just make that clear.
Did anybody else want to add anything to
that? Something that I always tell people when they come down is it's less of a matter of what the movement as a whole wants, because I think part of the strength that we have is that we don't make specific demands like end the war or this or that, because once you make a specific demand like that, you alienate part of that 99% that really needs to be part of this movement. Because the real issue is that 99% of the population is being disenfranchised by corporate involvement in politics through undue amounts of money given to political campaigns. And that specifically is just a huge problem that can be solved in this country, that can really go a long way in turning around this economic trouble and a lot of the other problems that are in this country.
Yeah, I think someone brought up the term propaganda wars at this point. I think that's a very interesting point that you make, because there's a lot of criticism that from occupiers that I've met here in Washington, D.C. and also in New York City, criticism of mainstream media and the way that they portray the occupations and the interviews that they conduct to try to paint the protests in one light or the other, depending on whatever agenda each network has. But at the same time, there's criticisms from a lot of media outlets saying, a lot of these folks are maybe too timid to talk to the cameras, or don't want to talk to cameras, or don't want to or don't want to appear on television, and that in a way is their way of saying, they're criticizing us, we're going to delegitimize them. Does anybody else get a sense of that going on?
Yeah, definitely. You can see the reporters from the major outlets that come in cherry pick their interviews, and go and pass right by the people who are there for legitimate causes, and go to somebody who they know will give the interview they want, or the interview that will disillusion people, or the interview that they have been put there to give. Because there's a lot of people who show up just for when the press gets there, say their 2 cents, and they leave, and that's a problem I feel with every occupation is, this is only 2 months old. As it grows, it's something that we need to address. But yeah, it absolutely, it's both ways.
And Ted, I want to throw that question back at you if you're still there with us. Do you see that a lot in New York City? Do you see a lot of cherry picking with the way the interviews are conducted?
Well, of course, yeah, you will see that at any occupation, and you'll see that really at any kind of media event. There's certain kinds of faces and certain types of people that the media wants. If they want to spin a story as badly, they're going to interview people who are untelegenic and who they think are going to say something stupid. If they want to spin it positively, they'll choose someone who they think is attractive in some kind of generic American way. That's just the way the media always works. I can say as a member of the media, in my own way, that it is I can imagine that they are somewhat frustrated by the lack of leadership in the movement, because they're really used to going to having one phone number that they can call and getting an easy quote. And this doesn't lend itself to that. And it annoys them, and they probably don't like it. It reminds me a lot of the stories about how the media turned against Howard Dean in the primaries a few years back, because he just didn't hobnob with the reporters in the press bus, and they didn't like him, and they decided they were going to jack him up, and they did after the Dean scream. And so, definitely there's a there's a propaganda component. I think all the occupations really do need to have propaganda working groups where which manage their message, which put out, which coordinate their poster, their graphic imagery, their online presence, and some of them do have that. But you need more of it, and it has to be. It's good to have a few, rotating spokespeople that the media can talk to. But the bottom line is there are no leaders. And that's a good thing.
And Ted, I want to follow up that with some insight that you might have. Being in New York City and the Occupy Wall Street movement, after 2 months, has seen hundreds and hundreds of arrests. What's the sentiment like with police in New York City? There's the images that we've seen in the rest of the country and around the world of police beating up protesters, and it seems that now they're even turning on journalists. Do you get a sense of that as well?
Well, this is all part of the general trend of the of journalists having less privileges at news scenes than they used to. When I started being a reporter back in the late '80s, a press pass was really a free pass to go anywhere you wanted. You could even go to, say, the scene of a fire and go into the fire as long as you didn't get in the way of the firefighters. Now that kind of thing is inconceivable. And you can even wave your press badge at a cop, and he doesn't care. He'll still arrest you just the same. The authorities see the media, especially sympathetic media like indie media, as being the enemy. So they're trying to shut that down so that they can manage the story. I mean, the authorities are very frightened of the Occupy movement. It represents the greatest threat to them since the 1960s. So if anything, the response is just going to escalate.
And what do you think? What kind of effect do you think that's having on the movement itself? The way police in New York City, or the way police in Oakland and other parts of the country where they're being very harsh on protesters. What sort of effect do you think that's having on the overall movement? Because I would get the sense that would almost give it more power.
Well, I think in general, it does give it more power. What it does is for people who are on the fence and wondering whether or not they need to get involved, there's a lot of them who say, I can't let those people be out in the cold facing down the police by themselves. I've got to go out and join. And then there's obviously, but human reactions are individual. There's some people who understandably are frightened and don't want to face down heavily armed police officers with pepper spray. I know people who have asthma, and they don't want to deal with pepper spray, and with good reason. So it really is individual. But history proves that police violence tends to really cause movements to grow. If they wanted this to go away, they would kill it with kindness, and that's not what they're doing.
Now, I want to throw the question back at our audience. Do you guys get a sense of that, being there every day in the trenches, as they'd say, with police having that threat of a possible eviction like you've seen in New York or in Oakland, the way that police have been treating protesters and occupiers? Do any of you get a sense that it empowers you as a protester, empowers the movement? I think she wanted to get the mic there.
I was going to say that I came from Denver, and what got me out here was seeing footage of the women that were pepper sprayed in New York. Like I was one of those on the fence people, and it wasn't until I saw that I actually decided to come out here. So I think for me personally, that was a big reason for me coming.
Sure. Anybody else want to add? Maybe why, what brought you out, and whether or not you feel it does empower the movement?
Yeah. To go back to what she said, some of those girls were like 16 years old. I mean, they were just there. They couldn't be like led away. They fenced them up, and they were saying, "Let me out," and then they got pepper sprayed. I mean, what are they supposed to do with that? That's just ridiculous. Sorry. Yeah, it's kind of different. You get used to it though. The cops being around when they start to like mobilize on like the corners and all that stuff. After all the threats they give you and all that, it gets kind of But it's a normal thing after a while. After 2 months of it, happens every day.
Sure. Yeah, and make sure you hold the mic nice up there so we can get a good audio now.
I just wanted to point out, I took exception to one thing Tom said. I don't think we're a leaderless movement. I think we're a movement of leaders. You can talk to anybody, and their opinion is just as valid as any spokesperson or anybody else in this movement. My opinion is just as valid as the next guy or woman sitting next to me. And I think that's one of the other great things about what's going on. It's a completely horizontal movement.
Back to what you said about the police brutality and how the authorities are responding to us. It is, in essence, showing their true colors. And, people have this idea that the Occupy movement is socialist or communist or whatever, this and that. And I'm not saying that there's not people that support those ideals, but I think when you look at all the police brutality and, 18-year-old kids getting hosed down and maced by, John Pike, and you look at all of these things that have happened since this occupation started, this is showing that, this country has done some pretty atrocious things in the name of spreading democracy. And then when you see this kind of thing happening, you wonder, do we even have this democracy that we're supposedly trying to spread? And that's the point. It's challenging our own perceptions about what we believed about this country from the start. And, these people, that are involved in the movement that have put their lives on the line for it, that's the ultimate challenge right there. I had this analogy that, yes, we call ourselves the 99%, but what I'm going to be metaphorical here. Like, I would actually consider us more like 50%. And then you have 49% of the people, which I would say don't really know what the movement's about or hate the movement or are authorities that are like, oh, wow, I really don't want to be hosing down, peaceful protesters. And then you have the 1%. And I think the goal of this movement right now, or one kind of underlying goal of this movement is to try and unite us all as be like, hey, we're all the 99%. That is extremely important in my eyes. Sure. Establishing democracy in the United States.
Sure, yeah. And I think, did you have anything to add, Bob, to that?
Well, I think as far as the police are concerned and the authorities here in D.C., they've been rather benevolent compared to what they are elsewhere. But I sense that they're waiting in the wings for something to happen. As you know, the DHS has been coordinating a nationwide crackdown on the occupations, and we have visitors over at Freedom Plaza from DHS from time to time, and they're across the street right above us watching us. They have cameras up there. So, right now we're putting up our Arctic tents and stuff, and they were over there looking at that today. So I don't think they like that too much either. So there may be some, unwanted police action happening over there pretty soon.
So do you anticipate there to be anything being on the ground here in Washington D.C. in the Occupy D.C.? Do you get a sense that the police are maybe waiting for something or planning some sort of tactic to try something with the encampment here?
It's pretty obvious that they are. They go out every single day. They'll walk through the park and they're looking for something in order to give them a reason to move forward with it. I was also just going to address one more thing. The reason why I'm dressed the way I am, not because I'm trying to be, radical or anything, but I'm a member of a certain department in New York City that works closely with the police on a completely non-law enforcement way. And, I take certain issue with people painting all law enforcement with the same brush because I was in New York City during the crackdowns, and I can tell you that not all the police officers involved were even close to the way that, obviously, there were certain people who there were certain police officers who were acting very brutally, hooliganish almost. But at the same time, I saw a minority of the cops involved were actually, they are the 99%. They are the underpaid city workers like myself, whose union has been trampled on time and time again, whose their places of work are being closed down time and time again. And we're out there trying to help people. And while not all law enforcement is good, not all law enforcement is bad, but, it's something that we have to come to terms with the fact that I don't have a problem with law enforcement. I have a problem with the people telling law enforcement what to do. And it's their job to follow orders, and sometimes to the detriment of us. So, I don't think that all law enforcement is bad, so.
Sure. And this next question I want to throw back at you, Ted. Being a political cartoonist, being a member of the media, I've seen a lot of cartoons and depictions and even skits in social media sites and on funny TV episodes of certain shows, I suppose you could say. The way they are painting these the brutality by the police, and some say that if this were in a country, if this pepper spraying incidents or police beating up people at the park were happening in an oil-rich country the United States would invade. Do you get a sense? Do you get a sense that that the United States is acting in a way that's suddenly surprising a lot of people in the way that they're treating protesters?
Well, when we went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, I talked to my mom and I told her I thought there would be riots in the streets as a result. And she said, "Are you kidding me? Those people are brown. Americans don't care." And, what's changed now is that a lot of the faces that are getting pepper sprayed and beaten are white and they're American. And I'm sorry, but it matters. It's in the same way that it shocked middle America to see, young men and women dressed in suits being beaten up by Southern sheriffs back during the early 1960s in the Deep South. It shocks a lot of middle Americans to see the government that they view as benevolent, sort of casually pepper spraying those kids at UC Davis the same way that your bug exterminator sprays for roaches in your apartment. It is, it's just kind of amazing. And, you compare the dignity of the victims of police brutality to the, disgusting, vile violence, the casual violence of the system as it's carried out by the police officers. And, it can't help but shock people. I know a lot of editorial cartoonists, it's really almost all of them. And I'm friends even with some right-wing conservatives who also have been shocked by this. They would like to characterize this as a movement of spoiled, dirty hippies, but it's pretty hard to do that or to criticize people for, you can't really tell people get a job when the response is, we're out here because we want jobs. So it's a pretty successful movement from the standpoint of garnering sympathy from the great silent majority, as they used to say back during the Nixon years.
And so what do you think we can expect to see next as a result of this? Are we going to continue to see more, satire made of this? Because a lot of times that can be viewed as propaganda as well. But do you see the satire actually having an effect, a positive effect, for people to maybe gain more support for the movement?
Well, the satire is, look, the satire always goes after whatever is the biggest story in the news. I was talking to a fellow editorial cartoonist, Matt Bors, the other day about, what we're doing. And we were both talking about how this year is the first year in our careers that we've hardly done any cartoons about the Republican primary candidates. I haven't done a single Herman Cain cartoon. I've done one about Mitt Romney. I've done nothing.
And I hate to cut you off. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the first segment. But I do want to. But we are looking forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks again to Ted Rall, political cartoonist from New York City. Thank you, Ted. And we will be right back after this short break, and we will be discussing the roots of the Occupy Wall Street movement and whether or not it was influenced by the Arab Spring in North Africa and the Middle East. Welcome back to this special edition of 2.5 Hours. I'm your host, Manuel Rapalo, and we are joined today by a very special guest, Chris Banks, an organizer with Occupy San Francisco. How are you, Chris?
I'm good, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I also want to thank our audience who will be participating. We're having an open dialogue about Occupy Wall Street and the future of capitalism here in America and around the world. I want to start off with a question for you, Chris. How are things on the ground in San Francisco and in Oakland from what you've observed?
Well, the situation generally is that enthusiasm remains very high. Occupy San Francisco is still up and running. Day to day, there's about 200 people camping out. Thousands more people coming through to visit, to volunteer. Not everybody who supports it can camp. Those that have other responsibilities, and they find ways to support. In Oakland, there's actually the campsites had been shut down last weekend. And as your previous guest kind of went over, the number of raids that have been taking place have been increasing. So the Occupy Oakland camp, in the last 4 weeks that it's existed, since October 10th, was raided 4 times, an average of once per week. In San Francisco, the police raided that camp 5 times in the last 6 weeks. In Berkeley, there was 2 separate attempts to organize an encampment, and that was raided twice and shut down twice. And we saw everybody's been discussing the recent incident at UC Berkeley or UC Davis, the kind of infamous pepper spraying incident. Students who weren't even attempting to establish a camp, but more just have a demonstration. However, as far as what's happening in Oakland right now, there's not a physical camp, but the tent camps were always really one tactic of a variety of tactics. And so 1 week after the camp was shut down last Saturday, there was a demonstration of over 5,000 people that marched through downtown Oakland. Currently, there's about 30 or 40 people attempting to occupy a vacant lot, which is in foreclosure right now. And so you can see that the movement is pushing forward, and the enthusiasm that people are feeling towards it is not really subsided. And as the discussion was pointing out earlier, every incident of police violence has actually led to an outpouring of support and kind of the growth of the whole thing.
And Chris, I wanted to ask you a question about, it's been 2 months since Occupy Wall Street started. It has subsequently spawned similar movements all over the country and even around the world. If you could give us a little bit of a background of how it started in California, where you are in San Francisco, but also Oakland, and whether or not you think that a lot of the inspiration and the tactics come from both there and in New York City and in Washington, D.C., whether or not you feel a lot of that inspiration comes from the Arab Spring and the uprisings that swept through North Africa and the Middle East in the earlier part of this year.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt any longer that the Occupy movement, which started in New York City, was inspired by the revolutions that are ongoing in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Yemen, and other places. Those events were really a catalyst for what we're seeing right now. It forced people, the working people in the United States, what we call the 99%, to grapple with the question of radical change and revolution. And Egypt can, for many people, seem like a faraway place, but many people also understood that we have a direct connection with the struggle of the Egyptian people. And that is the fact that the 1% in the United States was the really neo-colonial backer for the Mubarak regime, an unpopular regime, a regime that couldn't exist without United States and Western support. And so many of the people that had been active in the anti-war movement in the United States for the last decade understood that and made those connections, and more people are making those connections, and they feel a deep sense of solidarity with the people of Egypt and Tunisia and all over, and really oppressed people all over the world. And they identify with that, and they draw inspiration from the victories that they've achieved there and their ongoing struggle. And I think that the movement in California really started several weeks after what took place in Wall Street. And there's no doubt that what the police brutality, the videos that went viral of the police attacking and brutalizing demonstrators, were the initial impulse for the growth of the movement in the Bay Area and in California in general. Of course, it doesn't explain everything. The movement itself exists because of a really, up to now, inactive or not act upon, but frustration with how things are going. Many people over the last 3 years, their way of being politically active was to go cast a ballot, to vote. Every 2 or 4 years, you're told, the one way you can enact change in the United States is to vote. And so many people did that in historic numbers in 2008. And they voted in the Democrats, and the Democrats controlled both houses of the Congress, the executive office. If every Republican had voted against any law they proposed, they still could have passed it. And nothing changed. And not only did nothing change, but all of the things that people are frustrated and angry about, and you hear them talk about when you go to the demonstrations, the fact that the wars are still going on, not only just going on, but expanding. In Afghanistan, the number of troops tripled. The bailout of the banks went on to the tune of $11 trillion. The number of undocumented people deported, more deported under 1 year of Obama than 8 years of Bush. So these are kind of things that had been kind of simmering and leading people to what we see today, which is kind of a mass movement that's exploded, and the idea of the occupation has really been a trigger for it.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to throw that question back over at our audience. Do you feel the same way? Do you feel as though it was the Arab Spring that influenced what happened in Wall Street? And what's really behind this movement? What's the driving force that's bringing people out of their homes and into the streets and into occupations across the country? And now, from what we've seen on television and newspapers from abroad, really around the world. Anybody?
Yeah, my name is Daniel, and I consider myself a world citizen. I think that the financial system is part of the corruption. The Arab Spring, it's based on the oil, the value of oil, and how corporations have been analyzed in the stock market by the value of the profit that they make, not by the care quality that they can deliver to people that work for them or people that they provide services to. So I think that our whole world is kind of moving in a direction where we need to come back. Personally, for me, it's kind of a spiritual movement, because I feel that a peaceful movement is very powerful, and it's being shown in the news that when the police retaliate and they do inflict pain against people on TV, it's powerful in our demonstrations. So it does make us stronger. Where I can see this moving is the strength is going to continue to grow, and our population of people that occupy is going to grow as we continue peaceful demonstrations. So.
Anybody else share that sentiment or maybe feel a different way?
I saw a picture today of a group of Christians forming a human chain around a group of Muslims, praying, protecting them in Tahrir Square. And that was very inspiring. So the revolution there continues to inspire me personally. And I think what this movement is really doing worldwide is seeing that these divisions that have, in a sense, been imposed on us by the 1% are not real. We're in the same struggle. We're one humanity, and we all want a better future. So we can work together on these principles. All the, not just monotheistic religions, but many religions share the same values. And I think that the revolutions happening around the world, are becoming awakened to that fact.
Did anybody else want to add anything to that?
For me, I really think if you go back 2,000 years ago, Jesus taught on this stuff, and Gandhi taught on this stuff, and so many people have taught on looking out for the marginalized, looking out for the downtrodden, and this movement is doing that, and I just want to encourage people to see that in this movement. When homeless become whole again because we're loving on them, is a powerful thing.
That's a very good point. Another question that I wanted to bring up, and it's actually a point that Chris that touched on just now, is President Obama's announcement of bringing an end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I want to hear your thoughts on that and how you feel about how you feel about those announcements having end the wars being a strong rhetoric from the beginning of the movement. It's not just about being anti-corporate greed or anti-government corruption, but it's also to bring an end to these wars. And I want to get a sense of how you felt when you heard those when you heard the announcements from the Obama administration that there are dates to end those wars. Did you have a comment?
Yes, I did. When I heard that when I heard Barack Obama say, "Oh yes, the troops are coming home," that was my Barack Obama impression. I was like, "Oh, that's fantastic. The troops are coming home," but he's not going to tell the American people that we still have 250,000 contractors in Iraq, and I don't know how many in Afghanistan protecting assets there. He's not going to tell people that. They're not going to tell people that they're not going to talk about Blackwater, XC, Halliburton, all of that. They're not going to mention it. I think that whenever we say, "Oh, we're bringing the troops home," it's always supposed to be just this great jubilant time. Yes, the troops are coming home. That's just one of those great things that you say in order to get people to. But there's so many other factors at play here that the mainstream media will just be happy to leave out. The treatment of veterans, they don't want to mention that, hey, veterans are going to come home and they're going to have, PTSD and mental issues. They're not going to have jobs, and they're going to be encountered with the same problems that, many American citizens are facing. And what are they going to do about it? Oh, that's right, nothing. So it's, I just think you just have to look deeper, just delve a little bit deeper into what is actually happening instead of what we're being told.
Does anybody want to add to that comment or maybe share a different perspective?
Along with the announcement that the troops are coming home, I'd also like to bring up the point that the Obama administration last week praised the Arab League for bringing sanctions against Syria for cracking down on peaceful protesters, while at the same time the U.S. government is doing the exact same thing here. I just find that ironic. But in respect for the troops coming home, the main combat troops are coming home. They said that 4 years ago and 6 years ago. It's been said so many times, and I'll only really believe it when it really happens. Aside from all the contractors that will remain there, interfering with that country's either Afghanistan or Iraq, interfering with what they're going to be doing there as an American presence, regardless if they're combat troops or Army, Marine Corps, Navy, or Air Force. It doesn't really matter.
Sure. And did you want to add something as well?
Yes. When we went into Afghanistan, everybody was like, we're going into Afghanistan. And then all of a sudden we came up with these mysterious weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, excuse me. When he says he's bringing the troops out of those countries, where's he going to send them? Are they really coming home? Maybe he'll send some to Libya. Maybe he'll feel it within his power to send some as peacekeeping forces into Egypt. We don't really know. I think it's all subterfuge. Our government is full of lies, and I just can't believe a word they say until they actually prove it.
Sure. Chris, did you want to add anything to that? That was a point that you had brought up earlier. Was that being part of the rhetoric of Occupy Together, of the Occupy movement, was to end these wars? What was your reaction to hearing the announcements from the Obama administration?
I think that whether they withdraw some troops or they promise to withdraw some troops at a certain point, we have to understand the reasons why. It's not, if they withdraw any troops, it's not because the State Department or the 1% has really woken up one day and decided how much they value the lives of Iraqis, and they're going to respect the Iraqis' right to determine their own future. The goal was never to permanently militarily occupy Iraq. The original goal was to have a very fast and overwhelming military assault on a country and install quote unquote friendly government, that friendly to the interests of the 1%. They haven't been able to achieve that. In Afghanistan, there's what you could quite literally call a puppet government. In Iraq, the regime that has been installed with the backing of the United States has to consider a more complicated kind of terrain. I mean, it has to really think that the masses of the Iraqis want the occupation to end immediately. And what will the response be if they continue to extend the term of the U.S. military's presence there? And so these are all things that factor in, but it doesn't change the reality, which is that if the U.S. leaves Iraq, which, as one of your the guests there said, and correctly, leaving isn't really leaving. They're going to be leaving, 100,000 contractors, which are paid mercenaries, as well as having the biggest embassy, which is really a city. They built a city in Baghdad that will be home to the United States. And the United States has dozens of military bases all over the region. And so they'll start, doing this, what they call over the horizon tactic, meaning that when necessary, U.S. forces can intervene in the country if the Iraqis start, exercising too much control. So we have to really understand that all of this is part of the imperialist wars, whether it's the occupation in Afghanistan, Iraq, the funding of the occupation of Palestine, the threats against Iran, the threats against Venezuela, they're all they come from the same thing that the Occupy movement in the U.S. is fighting against, which is the control and direction of our society by an insignificant 1%. And the occupations are in their interests. They're not in our interests. Workers, sons and daughters get sent to go kill and be killed. And as one of your guests said, when they get home, they're cast aside. They're disposed of, really. And so these aren't in our interest. And that's why, there was a conversation about demands before, and are there demands or are there not demands? And whether or not there's a list that you can pull up online of concrete demands, everybody has a sense of what this movement is about, including the ruling class in the United States, which is why they have responded differently to the Tea Party movement than they have to the Occupy movement. They knew the Tea Party movement was a right-wing kind of reactionary movement. And so you've had demonstrations, rallies of Tea Partiers that are armed. They'll go to a city council meeting and they'll be strapped, right? The police don't crack down on that. Imagine what would happen if occupiers did that, right? So, you can see the reaction of the 1%, of the police that the 1% control has been extremely different. And it's because they know that the content of the Occupy movement and the potential for it to be a very radical, very progressive movement that is anti-war, that sees itself, that identifies itself more with the 99% in Iraq and Afghanistan than with, the bankers on Wall Street. And that's a very dangerous thing. And it's why the police are being used really as an instrument to attempt to crush the movement. But it's been having the opposite effect, actually. It's led to the growth of the movement.
And I want to pose a question to the audience, and it's actually backtracking a little bit to something else that Chris had brought up when he spoke about the record turnout for voters in 2008 when Americans voted in Barack Obama, expecting to see change. And this is going to be kind of a two-part question for the members of the audience, and that is, do you still feel after 2008 that your vote as an American counts? Does it make a difference? And the second part of the question would actually be, who are you planning to vote for in 2012?
First off, I knew that my vote didn't count when I first learned about the system we use, how actually the popular vote means nothing as long as the Electoral College decides who wants to go where. And we learned that in Bush v. Gore when the Florida Supreme Court shut down illegally the recount process. And some that I want to touch on real quickly in relations to pulling troops out. Two things. One, it's an election year. Obama now is going to be the savior of pulling people out of Iraq. Two, Afghanistan has already called for long-term presence from the U.S. for the stability of their country. That does two things. One, keeps troops there, but two, uses that as a pad to jump into Iran, because that's going to be the obvious next target of our imperialistic minded people. Anyhow, just want to touch on that this is, that's, there's other reasons, as well as a super committee failure that slashes domestic as well as spending cuts for the military. But the vote, as far as the vote goes in this election, I think we should occupy the vote, personally, legitimately, and either put somebody on the ballot who we can get behind, or just completely boycott it, or do something of the sort that shows, Democrats, Republicans are both the problem. And as this movement is trying to be painted more as a left movement, and some people are, the Democrats have heavily infiltrated the occupation here, and trying to get it to the Democratic side. And we have to stop and say, no, you're both the problem. We're not with either side. We see that you're really just one party, and you just are meant to keep everyone so focused on Republicans versus Democrats that you don't see that you're doing the same thing. So the vote is worthless. If voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal.
Sure.
An excellent example of that is in the 2010 elections, where the Tea Party got huge support from the voting bloc. They ran on jobs in the economy, and we got a bunch of laws passed on gay marriage and immigration. They'll run on whatever the hell is going to get them votes, but when it comes down to actual policy, they're not going to do it unless it's in the favor of their corporate backing, which playing into the two-party system right now is just playing into the broken system. It's not going to achieve anything for anybody, because no matter what they say they're going to do, 9 times out of 10 they don't, because that's not where their money comes from. That's not how they get elected. You don't get elected by having good ideas. You get elected by having the most money. And the way you get the most money is doing favors for corporations.
Just quickly, it's not even they don't even try and hide it either. You constantly hear about which Republican nominee has the most money, and ever since Herman Cain started getting more money, he's the front runner now.
Well, it seems to be a general consensus that many people feel that whoever controls the money controls the outcome of the elections. So my question for you would be, who controls the money?
I can answer some of that.
Okay.
I could see from, Ron Blagojevich, where he was trying to sell his seat and he was caught in attempting to do that the money has infiltrated the system to where it isn't a fair vote anymore. These officials that are elected are not representing us. They're representing themselves and the interests of corporations or whoever has funded them to get elected. So to take the money out of that, I'm not sure how we're going to elect anybody. If we had a person that would step up to be elected without taking any campaign funding at all, I don't know if that's possible, because we have a large multimedia organism. That's what I'm going to use to frame how we have media that gobbles up money, it gobbles up people, and it doesn't reflect the interests of the people that are watching. They're on TV watching the sensational. What's going to happen next? Who's going to be on TV next? And it's all the news that we have is like that. I can see maybe BBC, the news that I get from there, it's more of a straight kind of story, but our news is sensationalized, and it's only there to do that because we have to have this attention, because the news, if it loses our attention, they're not getting through to us. They're not being effective. We're not buying their products. We're not buying the story. So they have to captivate us some way to pull us back into it. And the occupations are drawing some of that energy away from the multimedia organism that's out there gobbling up at your attention. So if you can bring your attention back into what's going on, you can meet the people in these occupations. You can see who they are. Don't just go to the TV and watch on the TV. You have to go out and experience it. If you want to be part of the news, you have to go out and become the news. So that's my comment on that.
Sure, that's an interesting observation.
As far as the money goes on politics, where it comes from, where it all stems, where all problems stem from, are the 7 international banking cartels. They're led, the 3 of the 7 are the Rothschilds, Goldman Sachs, and the Lazards. The Federal Reserve System here in the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank, is not federal nor reserve. It is privately owned by people over in Europe, by these same international banking cartels. They systematically have given every country in the world a centrally privatized bank. And what that does is racks up debt in the name of the nation, and then they have to get funds from the World Bank or the IMF to come and bail them out, and that is how their country is privatized, is to basically through austerity measures. As far in the United States, the main money for our politicians comes from Wall Street. Now, Wall Street works very closely with these 7 international cartels because when we talk about the 1%, it really is a 0.5% or 0.001% is actually a much more accurate representation of who the people are that we're dealing with. So the money in politics, like Wall Street spent $1 billion to get Obama in office last term. And the money, he's still taking money from him as we speak, and it really comes to.
And I hate to cut you off. We're almost out of time. And just one quick question for you, Chris. We're almost out of time. This movement is as much anti-greed and anti-war as it is promoting camaraderie and promoting community. And we have just a few seconds left. If you can tell us your opinion, do you feel as though this is going to bring about a change to American capitalism as we know it?
Very quick. I think it's already brought about an enormous change in people's consciousness. People who 2 months ago thought that all the big decisions should be left up to politicians have now decided that the best way to make change, the only way to make change, is to do it themselves and to go into the streets. And I think that, along with the highlighting the class divisions in our society, the 1%, the 99%, have made an immense change already.
I'm so sorry, Chris, to cut you off, but thank you for filling us in. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this very special episode of 2.5 Hours. I want to thank our guest, Chris Banks, joining us from San Francisco, and a very special thanks to our audience. Again, this was a special event with 2.5 Hours. My name is Manuel Rappel, and please join us again next time. Yay.